Next up, we have as moderator, Ms. Jenny Lee, Undersecretary General of Hong Kong Green Finance Association, who will be hosting a panel discussions on technology, an enabler to accelerating our green finance ambitions. Let us welcome Jenny and our panelists to the stage. Technology and sustainability are rapidly emerging as the driving forces reshaping our financial ecosystem. As green and sustainable finance gains increasing momentum, new technologies capable of analyzing raw data to limit greenwashing and ensuring greater transparency and comparability of green credentials will be key to ensuring long-term and robust business transition. Special thanks go to ERM and MioTech for their support of the session. In the meantime, we encourage you to submit your questions from now until the end of the session via our event app, CFAN, for our panelists to answer. Over to you, Jenny.
Thank you, everyone. I hope you can hear me. It's a little bit noisy, but I'd like to welcome you to our panel. We have the pleasure of Dr. Calvin Kwan from Link REIT Asset Management, Jack Lin, President of MioTech, Eimund Liu, Digital Advisory and Partner for ERM, and Gabriel Wilson-Otto, Director for Sustainable Investing at Fidelity. So to put the lens on our discussion today, and to put the focus on the conversation, because obviously ESG data is very complex, it's very broad. So we want to focus on three main pain points for businesses that are looking to transition and to decarbonize. And so ultimately, with the aim to access green finance and the role of technology within this. So when we first look at businesses that are looking for long-term business growth and sustainability, so we take the Oracle survey that was recently published, 88% of the business leaders said that in order for their organizations to succeed in the long term, they need to use technology for, for their sustainability and for social issues. And the technology that are most useful for this are those that collect, verify, measure, and analyze ESG performance. The second perspective is really looking at the regulatory environment. We are seeing companies really coming under increasing pressure from regulators to enhance the ESG reporting. So for the TCFD that will be implemented for all companies in Hong Kong by 2050, we've had the Fund Management Code of Conduct for asset managers that was launched in August. And the Hong Kong Exchange listed companies have already had to report on their ESG status and requirements for the last couple of years. And so, when we look at this, companies are now faced with the challenge of, what type of data do I need? How do I get the data? What type of technology infrastructure is available? And what type of analytical tools do I have at my disposal to really kind of like analyze and plan my decarbonization pathway and get access to green finance? The third is really navigating the evolving standards landscape. We will see at the later part of this year, the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, will launch their standards, which will combine SASB and GRI. And this is important because companies, again, will have to be agile enough to evolve and use the data and analyze the data quickly to be able to help prepare for the future. So before we dive into these three areas, I would just like our panelists to give a 60-second elevator kind of overview of what they do within their organizations, because each are very different. And I think it puts a lens on kind of the role of data and technology in their respective companies. So Calvin.
Thanks, Jenny. Good afternoon. I'm Calvin Kwan. I'm with Link Asset Management Limited. I've been heading up sustainability for Link for about 10 years now. In the past, it was about energy savings and environmental initiatives and so forth. Most recently, it's been shifting the attention towards decarbonization, climate resilience, trying to understand how our portfolio may react to different regulations, rules that are coming up, and also climate issues. So for those of you who may not be familiar, our portfolio is in Hong Kong, mainland China, Australia, And each of these jurisdictions have very different climate issues and also decarbonization strategies. More recently, we've also been working very closely with our investors to understand their reporting requirements and how we might be able to help them meet some of their reporting discussions. In addition to that, I'm also co-chair of the Principles of Responsible Investments Real Estate Advisory Group, where we're working to develop essentially reporting protocols and frameworks, best practices for the real estate sector across the globe. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Jack.
Thank you, Jenny. Hello, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. I am Jack Lin. I'm here representing MioTech. MioTech is the leading ESG data and platforms company in Asia. Obviously, with all the excitement around ESG, what underpins all of this development is to have sufficient data of good enough quality so that you can make assessments and measure the progress. The problem that we try to solve from a technology point of view is, one, how do you gather that data using technology? Now, it could be something as simple as our AI engine operates in Mandarin. So unlike some of the global players, our AI actually operates native language in Chinese. So there's actually quite a bit of data that's available. It's more than you think, and from public sources. The challenge is how do you know where to get this data? How do you know how to organize it in a way that's useful to the users? And then how do you maintain it? So it's a good technical challenge. We're well on our way to meeting that from an Asian perspective. There's another aspect of data and framework, the methodology, that is necessarily very values-based. So when you talk about S and G, there currently are not a lot of solutions in the market that takes into account the conditions of the local regulatory environment, local markets that we operate in here in Asia. And as Calvin says, it's a very diverse market across the region. So we're very happy to be a member of the ecosystem to help further the cause so that practitioners will have the proper tools and the data to be able to continue on this journey. Thank you.
Thank you. Eimund.
Morning, or actually afternoon, I should say. Sorry, it's one of those days already. My name's Eimund. I'm a partner at ERM, and essentially we are, I think, the largest pure play sustainability consulting firm at the moment, I think. Sorry, I've got to get my taglines correct. But yeah, so my role really with, I guess, ERM and how we help our clients really is, I guess, at the intersection between technology and their own sustainability journeys. I think a lot of our clients are going through a lot of the pains and challenges that we've all been sharing this morning, that Calvin and Jack had mentioned before. And I think a lot of the questions we get asked by our clients is, okay, we get it, there is tech. We all are surrounded by tech. We all have our smartphones. We all are used to using technology. But why is it that I still have to send out Excel files to all of my suppliers? Why am I still, taking manual notes for certain things? How come I have to, spend 6 weeks trying to collect all this information about my company when this should be available at a click of a button? So in many ways, the technology is there, but has the organization itself thought about and is leveraging technology in a way that actually makes sense for them as an organization, right? And I think that's where there is a lot of challenges. That's where a lot of gaps are there. And I think as a firm with ERM, it's really just to understand and what those pain points are and to help them sort of walk that journey along. And hopefully technology can be part of that. So that's it.
Great. Gabriel.
Cheers, thanks, and thanks for the opportunity to be here, Jenny. So I'm Gabriel Wilson-Otto. I'm the head of sustainable investing strategy at Fidelity International. My role is basically to ensure that our asset managers and research analysts have the appropriate data sets, frameworks, tools in order to create the right client solutions relating to sustainable investments and our broader suite of offering for clients. So from an asset manager standpoint, sustainability is clearly rising in interest across the world, and all of that is underpinned on having appropriate data in order to be able to first perform the appropriate analysis on risks and opportunities, but then also to be able to represent the characteristics of funds in order to meet client expectations and regulatory requirements.
Great. So Gabriel, just you talk about the risk and opportunities. I think Jack, you are a leader in terms of providing ESG technology, infrastructure, and data. How and what type of solutions are you offering to asset managers to help them support their analytics and to kind of look at their portfolio risk management? And that's a question for you, Jack.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Gabriel represents our sort of a good example of a client that we aspire to serve. Because you're one of the biggest global asset managers, you're a fiduciary for clients from all around the world, and our goal is to provide the data and the framework that helps Gabriel's fund managers to make the best possible investment decisions, taking into account ESG factors. Now, the way we approach this problem, as I mentioned earlier, the introduction, we try to leverage on technology as much as is possible because it's a daunting task. For example, obviously there are the natural disclosures that come from the companies, and you've got to process that, and many of it comes in PDF files, and so you have to have an efficient way to scrub that and organize it, so it's not just sitting on someone's Excel files. In addition, there's a tremendous amount of alternative data that exists, government agencies, various entities, trade bodies, and whatnot, so you've got to organize that as well. Interestingly, we are a pioneer in using media, both official and social media. So we actively monitor 15,000 sources. Obviously, we're quite familiar with official media. On the social media side, obviously, there are always the question about, how do you know if this is valid? How do you know if this is not fake? And those are very good questions. We try not to be an arbiter of what is trending. We present to our clients the feeds on those companies that they are interested in, and let them be the judge of, get into the bottom of what these issues are. Because even if they are not, maybe there's gray areas, it may impact the share price, and it's important for the clients to know. So organizing all this in a framework where the region is evolving rapidly. So we have regulatory bodies across various jurisdictions throughout Asia. They're all aspiring towards more standardized disclosure rules, which is a positive development because it is a bit fragmented right now. There are different competing standards that are now in the process of being unified. So we're operating in a backdrop of a fast evolving environment, and that adds to the challenge. So and furthermore, we need to fill gaps. There's obviously incomplete universe of data, so you have to find ways to extrapolate, to predict, and to use the vast amount of data at your disposal to gain insights to fill those gaps. So those are some of the ways that we are approaching this challenge.
Right, I'm going to go back to you, Gabriel, in terms of Jack has just mentioned that he provides you with the data, but you obviously have to then go and validate the information, analyze it. As a capital allocator, how do you look at this data, and how do you use it to measure the performance of a company, and whether or not you exclude them or you include them, and is there sufficient data available, or is there too much data?
So a lot to unpack there. I think that if we look at the way large asset managers use ESG ratings or data, it's come a long way. So historically, asset managers were typically consumers of ratings, in that they would take someone else's view as to whether a company was good or bad on ESG grounds. Increasingly now we are consumers of the underlying raw data, and we put that through our own engines and calculation tools in order to be able to come up with a view which is consistent with how we see the world and how we invest. So when Jack was highlighting that they don't want to make a statement about whether a piece of information is good or bad, they just want to provide that information, that's exactly the type of data that we're seeking to consume. And the way that fits into our investment process is really twofold. The first is around basically getting better information to make better investment decisions. So there's no doubt that certain elements of ESG data can be material at some point in time. So we want to make sure that our managers have access to that data and that they're able to factor that into any of their investment decisions. The second part of it is to ensure that when we're creating products and representing them to clients as ESG products, that we have the right alignment with our clients' values and that we're able to represent the characteristics of these funds in a very transparent way. So they're the two main lenses that we look at. The tools that we have in order to deliver this are quite varied. I won't go into them into a lot of detail, but basically we have our own proprietary fundamental ESG rating, which is based on desktop research as well as quantified data from data providers. We also have a climate rating tool, which measures a company's alignment to net zero. We also have an SDG alignment tool, which is more of an output that focuses on the products and services that companies provide and the extent to which those revenue streams are consistent with the SDGs. So they're essentially the different tools that we use to help frame those two primary objectives.
Right, that's great. So we've heard now from Jack in terms of collecting the data from the underlying assets. We've heard from the capital allocator in terms of how they apply and use this information. And if we kind of like take a step back and look at it from the corporate perspective, in terms of like, you know, how do you actually, from a Link REIT, Calvin, take steps to kind of like capture that data at source? What type of instruments do you use to capture the carbon emissions? And then how do you then translate that to information that perhaps MioTech and then also Fidelity can then pick up and use for their analysis?
Thanks, Jenny. I think one of the first things that I'll mention is that in order to collect the right data, what we want to make sure is that everybody feels that data collection, data management, and collation is part of their own kind of job responsibility, right? So from a governance perspective, what we've introduced at Link is a net zero target to achieve this by 2035. So this is roughly about 15 years ahead of government. And the reason for this is because we want to encourage three things. Number one is going to be ownership of ESG initiatives, ownership of ESG data, accountability to make sure that the data that's being reported or going over to Jack and Gabriel is accurate and it's something that you guys can use, right? And the last part is really on the innovation side. How do we use technology to innovate, collect in a different way, and help us move towards this net zero strategy? So if I jump over to the technology side, there's been a few initiatives that we've had. Since 2010, we've actually implemented a building management system, which means that now we can control all of our air-conditioned properties from one location. So now from an efficiency perspective, it's a lot easier to manage the macro kind of energy consumption that we have. Now, because of that, we've been able to achieve roughly a 35% absolute reduction in energy consumption from 2010. So this is absolute, it's not intensity, much more difficult to do. Moving forward, what we're doing now is micromanaging. So we're using energy management systems to understand how energy is being used, where it's being used, and this actually gives us better control over the fine tuning. So now we're talking about changing the air conditioning set point from 24 to 24.5 based on who's in the property, what time of day it is, and other factors that we have. So under this micromanagement approach, we're still being able to project roughly a 5% absolute reduction on top of what we've already been able to achieve. So the key here is that you can't manage what you don't measure. So you absolutely have to collect data. We have sensors that monitor the physical attributes of our properties, the temperature, the humidity, airflow, and now very important, indoor air quality. We've installed footfall sensors to then understand how people are flowing through our properties. So if more people are moving to one side, how might I turn up or turn down the air conditioning, manage the air conditioning in a way that's better for that type of situation. We've installed meters to understand our water consumption. Believe it or not, for us, our properties are largely 30, 40 years old. A lot of them don't have sub-metering. And for us to really understand where we can manage, where we can reduce, we have to install that sub-metering. That's also tying into sub-metering for our tenants. We've worked with a few startups to help tenants understand their energy consumption at each individual socket, so they can figure out what equipment uses the most energy. Under all of this, once you have all the data, you can start doing regression models. You can start doing scenario analysis to understand how your energy consumption will change, how your footprint will change over the years based on different scenarios. Now, if I may, on the last part about data, moving towards the future, we're already looking at what we do in the future. So we're already exploring the use of blockchain technology really as a way to for real-time monitoring and a ledger of our energy consumption. Because moving forward, this will be quite critical in our decarbonization strategy, especially when we want to start matching, when we're using electricity, what the carbon footprint of that electricity at that particular moment in time is, and what potential renewable energy options we might be able to have as well. So this is how we're moving forward towards our net zero 2035 and also our decarbonization.
That's really impressive to have a 35% absolute reduction in your energy usage, and to be able to now move into that micro stage of managing the data. I guess if we now move it to Eimund, in terms of, from your perspective, you also work with many, not just real estate, but other corporates or financial institutions. From your perspectives, what new types of innovations are you seeing coming to market to help capture and manage kind of like the data? And when we think about where Link is right now in terms of their strategy, where are other corporates in their pathway?
Thanks for that, Jenny.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, I think it's great to hear stories like sort of from the corporate side from Calvin, because I think you have a lot more granularity in terms of what you can do. You can kind of have ideas, see what peers and other companies are doing, and you can kind of implement it. And I think from what we've been seeing, again, is the differences between the maturity levels of different companies, right? So you've got sort of companies who are, I would say, sort of at the forefront. So companies like Link or other ones that are well published in Hong Kong, like Swire Properties, or some of the other ones that are sort of New World. They kind of put themselves out there. They're very well invested. And the common thread we see with those kind of companies is that they've got not only the mission and the vision, but they also have the appetite and the stamina to actually continue to go forward. We do see some companies in the last few years where they've gone ahead, they've started off quite strong, they've invested in certain areas, they start to collect the data, but for whatever reason, be it a lack of budget or maybe it's a lack of a program, by the second or third year, it just disappears. Right, and therefore, what started off as a good idea, that it started to get some sort of real impact, it does fall back down to people. It comes back down to behavior. It comes back down to, and again, it kind of feeds back to the whole, if you know what you're doing and you measure what you're doing, that enables you to do certain things. So sometimes technology, while it can help you get the number itself, what we're actually getting a lot of challenges from is, for example, in the asset management space, where a lot of sort of these PE funds or asset managers are saying, look, I can get a report. I can go out there to the various data vendors or the various companies. Now you're telling me it's a B rating or it's an orange as opposed to a green or a red. Now what? And I think that's where there is still that sort of disconnect between a lot of the organization, which is, I know what I need to do. I believe I've got the purpose and I have the budget. The technology is there. But can we have the end-to-end type of approach? Where I think, hearing again from Calvin, how they can actually go out there and implement, sort of smart meters down to the micro level, down to the actual tenant level, so they can do things about that. Whereas a lot of companies just aren't quite there yet. So I would say from our side, I think I think the whys and the whats in terms of what they're doing and why they're doing it, I think that's almost established now. It's the hard part, which is the how do I do it now? So how do I measure it? Can I work with vendors? Are there people in the market that can help me on my decarbonization journey? What we're seeing is that last mile piece. So again, it's kind of like, yes, I want to reduce my carbon sort of emissions by 35%, but I'm a travel agency. I'm in Hong Kong. I can't really install photovoltaics. I can only do so much with my office. What can I do? So I think that's where we see a lot of opportunity in the market where, either big corporates or startups can actually kind of come into that to, again, build that last mile approach so we can kind of how to kind of just close the loop. So we can go from ambition to go through to get the data, the information, to actually determine what to do with the information and then act on it. Right? So I think that's probably where the challenge that we're seeing.
Yeah. And I guess, Jack, in terms of gathering the data, but then you also provide some analytical tools or to help clients look at kind of the different types of I guess factors within kind of some of the companies. Can you share with us some of the challenges of capturing kind of this data and generating kind of the analytical tools? What should kind of companies think about when they assess this?
Sure. But feeding on what Eimund and Calvin had just said, actually, from the data gathering perspective, the situation is improving. And let me explain to you why. the incentives for companies to disclose, and we're seeing this even on the unlisted side of the corporate universe. 20 years ago when I was a practitioner as a fund manager and just talking to clients about corporate governance, which is a big topic back then, Asian clients tend to be very pragmatic. So don't talk to me about doing good. We're here to make money, okay? This is our objective. We're here to make money, and if I have to give up returns, I'm not interested. Well, now the reason why companies have gotten a lot more interested in this is that it directly impacts their cost of capital. It's about money. It's about money. If you do it well, there are more people who demand your stock. Your stock price will be sustained at a higher level. And on the debt side, this is the interesting part. Lenders are increasingly using our data in credit lending decisions. So you could potentially get a lower interest loan because you're viewed as a better credit risk. And this extends up to the supply chain. So in terms of the availability of data, we see that increasing over time. And we see that the disclosure, the quality of the data, it's one thing when the government has a regulation and you have to comply. It's another thing when it directly impacts your business. So boards take it a lot more seriously. It comes from the chairman. And so this is the exciting part. Now to the question about, once we have 6 million companies in our database. So obviously there are not 6 million listed companies in Asia. So majority of that are unlisted companies. So once you have this big data set, you can actually do a lot of analytics. So that's what's interesting for fund managers in Gabriel's shop, that you can take a particular data set for a particular company and measure it against its peers by geography, by industry. You can slice it in many different ways. And that analytics gives you very powerful insights. And I think that's what, there are a lot of players now gathering data, so it's a software workflow issue. So every potential tech company now has got a solution to help you organize and source a company for reporting purposes. But if you can marry that to a vast database, the analytics is what makes it really, really interesting.
And I think when we were speaking before this panel, Gabriel, we were talking about, is there a correlation between market capitalization and these ESG ratings from providers? And I'd be interested to hear your view on this.
So,
putting you on the spot. Sorry.
This is an interesting one. Yeah. And so the short answer, I'll just skip straight to the answer and then give some context, is that there is a fantastic correlation between not only the size of a company and their ESG rating, but also the market capitalization of a company and the number of pages in their CSR report. So you might think that, yes, that's because they do more complex things and it takes more paper to tell you about them. The cynical view is that they're paying certain people in the industry more in order to create more expansive reporting on their operations, and that they've got more money to throw at the problems. So I think that this comes down to a really interesting point, which is, what are you actually trying to measure? Are you rewarding companies on the volume of disclosure? Is it the number of policies that they tick? Or is it actually the performance on core metrics, the way that they're integrated into strategy, the quality of the governance system surrounding this? Which is why I found Calvin's comments earlier so interesting, because it's highlighting a few metrics that are financially material and that are going to impact the profitability of the assets over a longer term, and has a clear integration and interrelationship with the company's strategy. And from an asset manager's perspective, that's really what we're trying to evaluate. If we step back to evaluating risks and opportunities, or the ability to characterize an asset as being good or bad relative to peers, we rely on that quantitative information in order to be able to make these sorts of assessments. So I think that we need to be very clear that when we're performing ESG analysis, we know what we're actually measuring. Is it an absolute measurement of risk? Is it a measurement of contribution to environmental and social outcomes? What are we actually trying to achieve? And to make sure that the data and frameworks we're using are aligned with that objective. And this is a bit of a rant, so apologies, but it's one of the reasons why I'm always confused when people say there's no correlation between ESG ratings. I would be more worried if there was correlation, because they're actually measuring completely different things. So some are absolute measures of risk, some are sector relative measures of risk, some are looking at financial issues, some are looking at environmental or double materiality. So you've got a huge range of different things that people are actually trying to measure. So I think understanding that context of a rating and then making sure that when we're using data, it's fit for purpose is a critical part of actually achieving meaningful insight. You can't just take one simple metric and line up all of the companies in a universe to say the ones in the top half are good, the others are bad. You really need to understand the data as well as what you're trying to use that insight for.
Yeah, no, that's really important, I think, to take away. So, Calvin, when you look at data and then you're looking at shareholder enterprise value, can you basically share some insights on how you go about that and how do you assess materiality? Because I think that's one of the areas that catches people like, yeah, well, how do I know whether or not it's material? What do I include? What do I exclude?
So I think I would summarize a little bit of both what Jack and Gabriel have said already, in the sense that number one, scientists don't make policies, policymakers don't understand science, but everybody understands money, right? So that makes a lot of sense. And what's happening now is that we're seeing this convergence and alignment of how businesses do reporting. With ISSB, most of you have heard about the 2 exposure drafts, which hopefully will be finalized in December and ready for early 2023. Now, under there were really 2 key words that I really zoned in on. I'm absolutely ecstatic that happened. Number 1 is material issues, okay? And number 2 is enterprise value, the effect of material issues on the enterprise value of a company. So, Gabriel, going back to your point about reporting, right? I think you said something along the lines of the high performers, and there's a correlation between high performance and the number of pages in their sustainability report. For us, we went from a 90-page sustainability report. I shrank it down to a strategic report, which covered really just the material issues for us, and which is actually our integrated report, strategic report, covering roughly 50 pages. But this year, we've actually jumped back up to 120. And the reason for that 120 is because data providers are asking us for this additional information so that you guys can make that granular assessment. So we've kind of went back and forth on this issue. But what's really important is this, again, material issues that will affect your enterprise value. From a real estate perspective, it's actually quite straightforward. On the environmental issues, it's going to be our carbon footprint, our energy management, energy assessment, and also an assessment of climate risks. So how do we use GIS to assess whether my portfolio is at risk for flooding? What will happen? How do we mitigate against that? From the governance perspective, it's really about the risks that we're dealing with there is going to be the emerging rules and regulations, some that have already taken place, right? So in Europe, we have SFDR, Sustainable Finance Disclosure Requirements. Corporates there have to deal with CSDR, Corporate Sustainable Disclosure Requirements. Here in Hong Kong, Jenny, you've mentioned quite a few of these, and we're finding that we have to report to this information. Number 2, you have to get the assurance and verification of this information as well, because if you don't, there's a possibility that our enterprise value may be hit from green lawsuits, sustainability lawsuits, data inaccuracies, right? So that's affecting our enterprise value as well. There's one key area, however, that I am concerned about. And I've already mentioned E, G, the last one's S, social. The key issue with social materiality is that most organizations they're the ones that determine what the material issues are. So I might have a specific reason for saying certain things are material or immaterial. What Jack mentioned in his presentation or discussion is something I think is absolutely amazing. How do you use AI technology to find the truly material issues on the social side, right? Because what we're seeing is that people, all of you, all of us, we have a huge impact on businesses. We have a huge impact on how the businesses' reputations are, their brands and so forth, and we know that brand value and reputation will impact enterprise value. However, most businesses don't really realize and listen to society itself. So where you're going with this, I think will be absolutely amazing. The fact that you're doing it in Chinese will be absolutely amazing in terms of helping Asia-Pacific companies deal with those key social issues. Now, the points on here is that by understanding using AI, we can understand what are the key important social issues for a variety of stakeholders. For our investors, it's going to be about decarbonization. For society, it may be some of the social issues that we have to deal with. And I think that that's going to be really fun on how we move forward with this area.
Yeah. I guess, Eimund, over to you. I mean, given all this needs and requirements, and we're seeing, I guess, these reporting increasing from 90 pages to 100 pages. We're seeing all these additional requirements come from regulations and also like stress testing, I guess, from financial institutions. I mean, from your perspective, do you agree with some of the comments that Calvin has just made now in terms of, the need to assess the materiality and the challenges of capturing this type of data?
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer, actually. Well, look, I mean, I think one word I kind of try to bring it back to, I think materiality, I think we all kind of have a sense of that, but I think there's also another word that I use is a practical too. What's the practicality of all of this? Because I think, I think the driver behind a lot of of trying to get more information is that people want to have more data so they can understand, make better decisions, make a more informed choice. But I also do think that we are almost, with the pendulum swinging almost the other way now, where it's way too much data. And so tools like, Jack is mentioning around AI, I think that's a great way of doing it. And in my experience, AI it's a shortcut, but I do tend to find, as we all know with the internet, is that, when themes start occurring, people start coalescing around certain ideas because it's kind of like people like to have that binary yes or no, this is good or bad. This is what everyone's actually sort of, looking into, talking about, discussing, just because the volume of traffic's there. But just because there's a lot of volume doesn't mean that it's actually what the issue happens to be. So I think it's more a case of, I think, just being, remaining skeptical or cynical a little bit to understand, well, what is that data? And again, in terms of just the point around sort of, I think it actually echoes back to the point of what we're seeing as a lot of stick happening in the market, regulators going off, it's like they all have this almost like regulator bingo, right? So if one says one thing, someone else has to say the same thing, but sort of add up the ante a little bit, and everyone ends up with doing a lot more things they have to do. I mean, I think in 2025, the Germans are saying that they have to go do their supply chain transparency and traceability back to raw materials. I'm like, I love the idea. I think it's fantastic. I think we should all know exactly where all our products are coming from, right back to raw materials. But then there's also the practicality of it. It's like, yeah, good luck with that. It's just like a lot of companies, they maintain a purposely vague supply chain for multiple reasons. Some of it valid, being it's competitive. Some of it is just the nature of, obviously, that particular sort of value chain. So I think what I'm most encouraged with, and where I see a lot more sort of management around it, is now there's not quite equal, but more growing carrots to the sticks, right? So I think, again, Jack mentioned before around the financing piece. It's like, so if you can provide the information, that unlocks better financing, that unlocks better relationships, it opens up your supply chains. We are starting to see some tech vendors out there who, some of the larger ones are only dealing with certain companies who are open and transparent, right? And so that's actually driving the overall sort of marketplace. But again, on the flip side of that, I've also spoken to a lot of suppliers, and they say, okay, now I've got to report not only to one person, but 60 other of my customers who have all varying degrees of sort of requirements, and my job is to make my widgets. My job is not to do your reporting, right? So there is, I guess, there's the pro, the con, the carrot, the stick. There's always kind of trying to find that happy medium, and that's why I think Calvin's point around materiality is a good one. It's like, I think you as an organization need to understand, well, what is it that is material to you, to your business? Where can you get value from it? Ideally, it aligns with your business partners, with your stakeholders, that everyone can be on that same journey. And in some ways, carbon has been that touch point, but it's one of multiple things within the E. And then the S is a whole different kettle of fish. So that's why in some ways, we all try to think now we're all into ESG. I was speaking to some other clients who are super skeptical about it because it's a fair point. How can you have one person or one team manage an entire ESG portfolio for a company? It's insane. Like it's not practical at all. But you also see the other side, which is, well, it's better to do something than nothing. So I think every firm and every company is kind of trying to find their way through. I think there's a lot of vendors and a lot of people who are trying to help people along that way. But I think ultimately the benefit is sort of outweighing the cost now. This is not like, say, in the accounting world, but back in the Sarbanes days when you had to do all this work around accounting just to kind of meet the requirements, which, yes, it kind of gave a safer marketplace, but where was the real value? I think now with TCFD and sort of now into TNFD going forward, I think there's more tangible impacts that people can get on board with, and that's what I think will really drive it forward.
Yeah, I think it's only a matter of time, really, before ESG factors become like financial statements and financial factors that, are one of the key kind of like decision-making tools now that businesses must have. I guess we have now open for some Q&A. So if people would like to submit questions, more than happy to share this with the panelists. I guess we do have the first question, and I would like to pose this to Jack. In terms of MioTech, you have a carbon kind of like tool, and what tool? And then I guess the question here is, what tools are being developed to kind of like close the gap on reliable carbon footprint? And I think how I guess is MioTech looking to do this for I guess investors, and maybe looking specifically at like the debt instrument like sovereign debt.
Sure. In terms of applying technology to tools for measurement, I totally agree with what Calvin said earlier. In fact, we do that service in China. So we provide that service to major landmark buildings in terms of managing their carbon footprint. So we put IoT sensors in the various touch points so we can manage real time, have a picture of what's going on. And so then you can then aspire towards a certain goal. So the topic of carbon is very interesting, and it's interconnected because a lot of companies in China export. And so if the European regulators start putting a price on carbon, you cannot ignore that if you want to sell to Europe. So you must deal with that, even though you're not sitting in Europe. So it's all interconnected. I do think that with the greater awareness and the mindset change that this is not simply helping the environment, which it is, but it's helping yourself. It's just good business sense, right? I think that's the biggest motivating factor. That carrot is going to drive huge growth. And the last point I'll make, we just onboarded one of the major consumer goods company in China onto our ESG platform. So they will use our software to all their affiliates globally and their hundreds of suppliers. If you want to sell to me, you have to fill out this questionnaire that MioTech's software sends to you. And if you do not take it seriously or you consistently put in inaccurate data, you could be excluded from the chain in the future. We'll go to someone else. So that's that kind of incentive, and you'll create a network effect. So 6 million companies will become 10 million companies, and the more data you gather, the more powerful this tool becomes. And so I'm actually very optimistic about the future of this, especially now that the market forces are at work.
Right. And Gabriel, are you seeing, and will Fidelity be like driving more newer kind of like product innovation on the back of kind of like the availability of all this data?
Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing very strong client demand for sustainable investing products. And so if we look at Europe, I think that the data there was that more than 2/3 of flows into new products were all into sustainable investing products. We're also seeing a sharp uptick in Asia with broad interest in these sorts of products. And there's really two camps that they fit into. One is fundamental integration, which I just describe as using ESG to get better insights and to make more money. The other camp is thematic aligned investments. And if we look at Asia, there is a huge demand for social alignment. So moving to the S pillar around social development, sustainable cities, that's a huge area of focus, alongside climate change, water, and biodiversity preservation. They're generally the main themes that are of interest to clients in Asia. So I would expect an increasing range of options for investors in the region, and hopefully some of these will start to make their way onto the shelves for MPF providers and plans so that a broader range of investors have a broader range of opportunities.
Great. And I guess, Calvin, from your perspective, do you see or foresee like launching or accessing more sustainable finance type products to help drive like a lot of your developments and enhancements going forward?
And I think the answer is yes. And I think this answer is really more for the real estate sector in general. The growth of green finance, sustainable finance has been tremendous over the last few years. And I think that it's been a very good opportunity for organizations to jump onto this pathway. Right? It's a great opportunity for incumbents to kind of improve their organizations as well. Now, if I look at this, we know that by now most financial institutions are asking, hey, do you want to make this product a sustainably linked loan, sustainable green bond, and so forth? And I think that's a good thing. Now, one of the issues, however, is that most of these only focus on one theme, whether it's green, blue, social impacts. And for me, that's not truly sustainability financing, right? So what we've done this year, or at the beginning of this year, we've updated our sustainability-linked financing or sustainability-linked instruments to mean that anytime we issue a sustainability-linked instrument, it has to have 3 KPIs. 1 KPI under environment, 1 KPI under social, and 1 KPI under governance. That is sustainability, not just one. Now, from this, it's helping us improve. Even though we've been doing this for 10 years, we're still finding ways to improve. So our latest sustainability loan requires us to apply and get approval for SBTI net zero standard, not SBTI standards, okay? So we've pushed ourselves even further by making it SBTI net zero standards. Our latest sustainability loan requires us on the social side to engage with people that are at or below poverty level so that we can help hire them, whether it's with us or whether it's through our vendors and contractors. So we're helping upward social mobility for the communities that we operate in. And then, on the environment side, our focus there isn't really on the carbon footprinting because we've already set our target for net zero. And we did not use that for our environment KPI. What we instead did was use the environment KPI to focus more on engagement with our key stakeholders to understand our scope 3 emissions. So what we're doing on our environment KPI is to make sure that we're introducing green leases with our tenants so that they're helping to provide the data that Gabriel keeps on asking us for, right, on our scope 3 emissions, and that hopefully, we feed into Jack's system on how do we collect this information. So if my tenants stop reporting the scope 3 information, maybe it means, hey, how do we engage and help them along this journey as well? So my summary is that sustainable financing is an absolutely great way for any organization to get started or to continue that improvement. And I think it's going to be here to stay.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And then I guess, Eimund, over to you in terms of thinking through how you support your clients. So I guess Calvin just unpacked quite a few items, but look at like scope 3, kind of like emissions. Obviously, that's a big challenge, and kind of like supply chain emissions. But I think one of the questions that came up here from the audience was, how do you, I guess, manage or work with clients who are requesting kind of like information about embodied carbon, kind of like around real estate? And maybe that's a question for Calvin versus for you. So between the two of you.
Go for it, Calvin.
Okay.
I'm definitely not. I mean, I can barely spell embodied carbon, and you want me to give it. Well, I mean, I'll probably answer it in a more broad way as opposed to the scientific or specific nature of embodied carbon. But I mean, I think it does speak towards scope 3 more broadly in that you are looking at the indirect emissions of other parties that impact your organization. So obviously through construction, through the life of the asset, or how do we actually account for it? I mean, I think it all does boil back down to, again, the early comments we all made around accuracy, about how to collect it. Is it something that we can kind of rely upon in terms of the information itself? But again, I think it's all back to that network effect of, if we were to look into embodied carbon, do your raw material providers give you that information, right? Is it available today? And again, some of these assets are 50 years old. So when is day zero? How do we then measure for that? But I would even go forward, like, well, what is that actually going to impact you going forward? Like, maybe it's something that you actually look into as part of your new constructions, or for your new developments, where it becomes more of a factor, as opposed to trying to go backwards and trying to do a complete inventory on it. So I think it's, again, it's a bit of a winging way of answering the question. But yeah, no, I think it just underlines the issue that, again, I think for things within our own control, we feel that we can do something about it. When it comes to us being accountable for things that are not in our control, that's when everyone is obviously needs a bit of help. And that's why if you look at everyone's disclosure these days, it's always the scope 1, scope 2, no worries. Scope 3, we'll get back to you. Because, and to be fair, there's 15 categories of scope 3, and in each one is complex in and of itself, right? So it's challenging.
Well, thank you for answering the very challenging question. And as we are coming up to time, let's quickly do a quick wrap up in terms of, if there was like, in 30 seconds or less, starting from Gabriel, what's the most critical piece of advice you would have for firms or organizations that are just starting to think about ESG, data and technology, and using that as a tool to accelerate their green finance ambitions?
For me, it really comes down to ensuring that there's the proper strategic integration of what you're doing. So how does sustainability fit within the strategy of a company, and to taking a broad view to make sure that everything that you're adopting can be integrated into part of the company's strategy, and to take a double materiality lens, so to understand where these elements are financially material and should just be integrated as part of good business practice, and then where do you go beyond that, and so where does it start actually moving into more of an impact lens and making sure that the balance you're striking is appropriate for your stakeholders.
Great. Eimund?
Gee, okay. That was a really good answer there, Gabriel. No, I guess recommendation for me from a technology standpoint, I think what I would recommend for 30 seconds is more think beyond the immediate requirement, right? So it's like if you're going to do your immediate reporting, that's great. You've collected your data for whatever it is, for emissions or for social or whatever. But I guess think one level deeper, which is okay. Well, if I've got this information, how else can I use it? What else can I use it for? And if I don't know what I can do today, how can I actually store it, record it, reuse it? Almost like a circularity kind of concept, but with data, so that you don't just kind of use it once and then just sort of throw that report away after you've kind of answered the question. But more, okay, if we are collecting information from our suppliers, or if we have our standard supplier due diligence exercise today, which every company has, can we use that process and then add in certain parts of the E, the S, and the G, so we can again reuse or not try to reinvent the wheel, but think more again beyond how do we actually take that next level? How do we reuse that information itself?
Great. Jack?
So I have a message for the free riders, the freeloaders, the the greenwashers. Okay, so we're coming for you because more transparency with the data that we're building. Okay, and remember we're using AI and we're using machine language learning, natural language learning. If you look at Google Translate and look how quickly that's improving, so it's continuous improvement. Every iteration, every second, it's getting better. So it will make it harder and harder for people who make claims that are they will be found out if you make unsubstantiated claims. So, which is good because then that's a greater incentive for the do-gooders who are trying to comply, who are trying to do their best, as opposed to those companies that are just kind of riding along with the wave.
Great. Calvin?
I would just leave with a couple of words similar to what I opened up with. Number one is really spread out the accountability and ownership of ESG data and reporting. From that, you'll hopefully be able to drive a little bit more innovation, whether it's through technology or transparency. The sustainability team is not the only one that should be doing this. Everyone else should be on board as well.
Great. Well, I think we have come up to time. I'd like to thank our panelists very much for such an engaging conversations. For the audience, for actually staying with us during your lunch break. Hopefully you can get some food, and to rethink for inviting us to be here today. Thank you. Great.
Thank you, Jenny, Eamon, Jack, Calvin, and Gabriel.